There are places, places that just soak things up, not just the dust of years, not just the faded wallpaper, but the emotions, the joy, the sorrow, the rage, the fear. And sometimes, if you're really truly unlucky, those emotions don't just fade away, they fester, they grow, they wait. And tonight, we're talking about one of those places, a house. A place that was supposed to be a home, a fresh start, but became a cage of shadows and whispers. This is Sarah's story, and trust me, you won't want to be alone when you hear it. Sarah had always dreamed of owning a place with character. Something old, with history etched into its very bones, a silent testament to forgotten lives and whispered secrets. So when she stumbled upon the listing for the Victorian house on the edge of town, a little rundown but ridiculously cheap, she jumped at it. It was perfect, or so she thought. 3 stories of faded grandeur, with intricate gingerbread trim peeling in places, a wraparound porch that offered views of the surrounding wild landscape, and enough overgrown garden to make it feel like her own private world. Isolated, yes, but that was part of the charm. A quiet escape from the city hustle, a serene refuge where she could finally breathe. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking boxes, painting walls in hopeful, lighter shades, and making the place her own. She hummed as she worked, convinced she was imbuing the old structure with new, vibrant life. Sure, the old house groaned and settled with an almost sentient sigh, its ancient timbers shifting in the night. Creaky floorboards sang their ancient, melancholic songs underfoot, and the pipes sometimes clanked with an unsettling, irregular rhythm, like a distant, rhythmic heartbeat. But that was just part of living in an old house, right? Sarah dismissed it all with a shrug and a smile, attributing the peculiarities to its venerable age. It had personality, she told herself, a charming eccentricity that simply needed understanding. Then the little things started, subtle at first, easily rationalized away. A door she was absolutely certain she'd closed, and latched would be found slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peering into the brightly lit hall. A light she'd painstakingly switched off would be mysteriously on when she re-entered a room, its bulb burning a little too brightly, a little too insistently. She'd blame her own forgetfulness, the quirks of an ancient electrical system, the natural decay of a structure from another era. But there was a growing unease, a faint, persistent prickle at the back of her neck that refused to dissipate, a quiet alarm bell that her conscious mind struggled to silence. The air in certain rooms would suddenly turn impossibly icy cold, a bone-deep chill that no amount of heating, no roaring fire could combat. She'd walk into the living room, and the temperature would plummet by 10 degrees in an instant, causing her breath to plume in front of her like a ghostly exhalation. Her skin would prickle, goosebumps rising unbidden, a shiver racking her frame that went beyond mere temperature. Then, just as suddenly, the cold would recede, leaving behind only a lingering, unsettling memory. And with the cold came a scent. Not the comforting smell of old wood and dust, but something else entirely. Something metallic, like old pennies and stagnant, brackish water, faint but persistently clinging to the air, especially near the grand, winding staircase that led to the upper floors. It was a smell that spoke of decay and something far older than rust. Then came the sounds. The whispers started subtly, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur, like a radio station barely tuned in, just beyond the reach of her understanding, a jumble of soft, indistinguishable syllables. She'd pause, straining to hear, holding her breath until her lungs ached, but the sound would vanish, leaving only the oppressive, vast silence of the house, a silence that felt heavy and expectant. She convinced herself it was the wind whistling through unseen cracks, or the ancient pipes gurgling with some internal pressure. But the whispers grew bolder, more distinct, shedding their ambiguity. They sounded like voices, hushed and low, just on the periphery of her hearing, carrying a timbre that was distinctly inhuman. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she swore she heard her name, called out softly, drawn out like a sigh from the depths of a dream. Sarah, it was a sound that both chilled and beckoned, a siren's call to an unknown horror. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, always from upstairs, always when she was alone downstairs. A slow dragging tread across the floorboards directly above her bedroom, then down the hall, pausing at the landing, as if contemplating its next move. She'd freeze, coffee cup half raised, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, listening with every fiber of her being. The rhythm was too regular, too purposeful to be the house settling, but when she'd race upstairs, propelled by a desperate, illogical hope, the rooms were always empty, silent, bathed in an unnerving stillness, waiting. The silence itself felt like a presence, a knowing observer. One evening, she was reading in bed, a fragile barrier of paperbacks against the encroaching darkness, a cup of tea steaming gently on her nightstand. She looked away for a second, her gaze drawn to the flickering shadows on the wall, then back to her book, her favorite bookmark, a little silver charm she cherished, a gift from her late grandmother, was gone. She searched everywhere, under the bed, in the sheets, on the floor, her frustration mounting with each fruitless sweep. Nothing. Frustrated and exhausted, she eventually gave up, attributing it to her growing distraction. The next morning she found it. It wasn't on her nightstand, or even in her room. It was meticulously placed on the cold, porcelain kitchen counter, next to the sink, where she distinctly remembered not taking it, not ever having brought it downstairs. A profound chill, unlike any cold spot she'd experienced, ran through her, deeper than any physical sensation. This wasn't forgetfulness, this wasn't an old house settling, this was deliberate, this was malevolent. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't a casual glance, a fleeting observation. It was a gaze, a crushing weight pressing down on her, an unseen force emanating from the dark corners, from the shadowed doorways, from the very walls themselves. She'd feel it most acutely in the evenings, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the house plunged into deeper shades of twilight and gloom. Every time she turned abruptly, her heart leaping into her throat, there was nothing, of course. Just the lengthening shadows, playing tricks on her strained eyes, making familiar shapes seem grotesque. But the feeling was so potent, so real, so utterly undeniable, that she started moving quickly through rooms, her steps hurried and uncertain, consciously avoiding eye contact with the dark corners, as if a glance might provoke whatever lurked there, might acknowledge its terrible existence. The dreams were the worst though. They started as vague anxieties, nebulous fears that dissolved upon waking, then spiraled into vivid, horrifying nightmares that clung to her like a shroud. Always the house. Always a feeling of suffocating dread, of being relentlessly pursued by something just out of sight, something breathing down her neck, its unseen presence a palpable weight. She'd wake in a cold sweat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, the lingering scent of old earth, dampness, and that metallic tang in her nostrils. One night, she dreamt of being trapped in the attic, the small, dusty window boarded up with rough, splintered planks, while something scratched relentlessly at the other side of the door, a desperate, frantic sound. The scraping grew louder, stronger, almost tearing through the wood. She woke up screaming, the sound echoing in the silent, expectant house, her own cry a hollow, pathetic thing, only to realize the attic door was still sealed shut, just as it had been since she moved in, untouched. The terror, however, was vividly real, seared into her consciousness. She tried desperately to rationalize it all: stress, imagination, the loneliness of being in a big, old house by herself, her mind playing tricks. She even bought sage and tried to cleanse the house, muttering prayers she barely remembered, feeling foolish yet desperate. It brought a brief, fleeting sense of calm, a fragile shield against the creeping fear, a moment of deluded peace. But it didn't last. The cold spots returned with renewed intensity. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, forming indistinct, horrifying phrases. The feeling of eyes on her back became a constant, suffocating companion, a brand on her very soul. The house, she realized, was merely toying with her. Then came the night the house decided it was done playing games. It was a Tuesday, a stormy night that had descended upon the town with unprecedented fury. Rain lashed against the windows, not just drumming, but hammering with a primal force, and the wind howled through the eaves, a mournful, agonizing cry that seemed to lament a forgotten tragedy. Sarah was huddled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to lose herself in the innocuous pages of a book, but her nerves were frayed, stretched thin and raw. Every creak, every groan of the old house was amplified by the storm, each sound a malevolent whisper directly into her ear. She felt it, a distinct surge of malevolent energy, a palpable shift in the very atmosphere of her home, as if something ancient and terrible had stirred from a long slumber. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen presences. The scratching started small, a rhythmic tap-tap-tap from inside the wall beside her bed, where she'd been lying just moments before. It sounded precisely like fingernails, then it became a furious scrape, 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 like claws tearing at plaster, growing louder, more frantic, moving along the wall, directly above her head. It was no longer the wind or pipes, it was deliberate, invasive. She jumped up, her book clattering to the floor, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, a terrifying arrhythmia. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's fury, a pathetic, desperate plea. "Is anyone there?" The scratching stopped abruptly. A dead, unnatural silence descended, so profound it was more terrifying than the noise, an active negation of sound itself. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath for a terrifying instant. Then, a low growl, guttural and chilling, emanated from the darkest corner of the living room. It wasn't human. It was something ancient, primal, filled with unimaginable malice, a sound that resonated deep within her bones, a vibration of pure malevolence. Sarah stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream that threatened to tear from her throat. The lights flickered wildly, dancing erratically, throwing grotesque, dancing shadows across the room, transforming familiar furniture into monstrous shapes, before dying altogether with a final, shuddering gasp. The house plunged into absolute, crushing darkness, a darkness that felt heavier, more substantial than any mere absence of light. Panic seized her, a cold, icy tendril of dread that wrapped around her heart, squeezing, making it impossible to breathe, to think, to move. She fumbled desperately for her phone, her fingers numb with terror, the screen a tiny, inadequate beacon in the oppressive blackness, illuminating nothing but her own trembling hand. Its weak light danced across the room, revealing fleeting glimpses of familiar objects turned sinister, twisted by the gloom. A shadow moved in the periphery of her vision, faster than anything natural, coalescing into something tall, gaunt, impossibly black, a rent in the very fabric of reality. That's when she saw it. Not a shadow this time, not a trick of the light, not a figment of her overwrought imagination. A figure. It was indistinct, a wavering column of pure darkness, absorbing all available light, but its form was undeniably humanoid, impossibly stretched and elongated, a blasphemous mockery of the human shape. It stood at the doorway leading to the kitchen, facing her, radiating an aura of profound wrongness. She couldn't make out details, no eyes, no face, no discernible features, but she felt its presence with an overwhelming certainty, a palpable wave of absolute hatred and despair radiating from it, a cold, crushing weight on her soul. It took a step, then another. Slowly, deliberately, inexorably, it began to advance towards her, a silent, predatory glide. Sarah backed away, her breath catching in her throat, a choked sob escaping her lips, her feet tangling in the rug. She crashed into the wall with a sickening thud, a sharp pain shooting up her spine, but it was nothing compared to the terror. Trapped, there was no escape. The air grew heavy, thick and viscous with that metallic, putrid smell, now overpowering, burning in her nostrils, tasting of blood and ancient decay. The whispers returned, surrounding her, pressing in from all sides, no longer just her name, but a chorus of tortured, overlapping voices, screaming silent agony directly into her mind, a cacophony of madness that threatened to shatter her sanity. "Get out, leave, you're not safe, it's mine, we are here, you are nothing." The words burrowed into her brain, burrowed into her very being. She squeezed her eyes shut, desperately trying to block out the terror, to retreat into the fragile sanctuary of her own mind, but it was useless. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar inside her head, a storm of madness. She opened her eyes, and the figure was closer, much closer, its indistinct form looming over her. She could feel the icy cold radiating from it, a cold that seeped into her bones, chilling her to the marrow, freezing her blood in her veins. Then, a cold, clammy hand, heavy and unnatural, like wet earth and polished stone, pressed against her shoulder. It was icy, colder than anything she had ever felt. A sickening, penetrating chill that pierced through her clothes and into her flesh, making her muscles seize, locking her in place. A low, guttural whisper, not from outside, but directly into her ear, so close she felt the frigid, dead air on her skin, hissed a single, horrifying word, a word that sealed her fate, acclaimed from a forgotten abyss. Mine, that was it, the final breaking point. Sarah let out a primal scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that tore through the stormy night, a raw, animalistic shriek. With a desperate, illogical burst of adrenaline, she lunged forward, not even looking, blindly pushing past where the entity stood. She didn't know how, but the front door, which she swore had been locked and bolted, suddenly swung open with a violent, agonizing creak, a door to a freedom she no longer deserved. She didn't run, she fled, bursting out into the stormy night, not even stopping for a coat, just an animalistic, overwhelming need to put distance between herself and it. The rain plastered her hair to her face, the wind lashed at her, tearing at her clothes, but she didn't feel the cold, didn't feel the sting of the elements. She felt only the terror, raw and all-consuming, the icy touch still burning on her shoulder like a brand, the chilling whisper still echoing in her mind, a relentless, haunting refrain. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs gave out, until she collapsed on the roadside, gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably, her body racked with residual fear. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The image of that impossibly black figure, the feel of that cold hand, the echo of that single, possessive word, was seared into her very soul, a permanent scar. Sarah never went back to that house. Not even for her things, which now felt tainted, cursed. The police found the front door wide open, the lights still off, the entire house eerily silent, a picture of undisturbed domesticity that belied the horror it contained. They found her belongings, untouched, just as she'd left them, waiting. They found nothing else. No intruders, no forced entry, just an old house, standing silent sentinel on the edge of town, its secrets locked within its ancient walls. To this day the house stands there still, on the edge of town, its windows dark and empty, like sightless eyes, its garden overgrown, reclaiming the earth around it. Locals whisper stories about it, about the strange occurrences, the unexplained disappearances, the unholy sounds that sometimes drift on the wind. They say it's haunted, of course, a common tale for old, abandoned places. But Sarah knows it's more than just a haunting. It's a place where something truly malevolent, something ancient and uncaring, festered, ruined and waited, a cosmic horror disguised as a decaying home. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind howls just right through the skeletal branches of the ancient trees, you can almost hear the faint, desperate whispers carried on the breeze, indistinguishable, yet terrifying. The echoes of what still waits inside, what it still claims as its own, patiently awaiting the next unwary soul.